All right, man. We got something major to talk about before Game 1. The Knicks fired Thibs, and I'm still processing this decision. You upset the Celtics. You make the conference finals for the first time in years, and now you're gone? A lot of it was still just Jalen Brunson having to make tough shots and create magic out of nothing. The Pistons went with an interesting defensive strategy, putting Tobias on Cat and Durant on Josh Hart for a decent amount of that series. As the series progressed, we saw more of Durant switching on to Cat, but that adjustment lowered Cat's three-point attempts significantly. I did not think they were going to do this, especially after the season they had. More so, Nesmith really gave him problems with that defensive intensity. But it just feels like there is so much more potential there that S being left on the table. When Mitchell Robinson came into games, that's when it felt like there was a little more of that simple, effective Brunson pick-and-roll action that actually created easier scoring opportunities for the team. I know Tatum eventually had that monster performance before the worst thing possible happened with the injuries. But before that breakdown, it was a lot of the Celtics just idling at the three-point line, looking confused by what the Knicks were throwing at them. That story that came out recently about the team's confidence in Cat defensively. The starting five had a negative net rating in the playoffs, which is a damning statistic for a team that's supposed to be contending. It also feels like sometimes they rely on Brunson way too much, putting an enormous burden on him to create offense. And all the internal discussions around that situation was not ideal. We'll just say that diplomatically. Looking at Michael Malone's track record, if it ends up being him taking over this team, who knows how it'll work out? But there are definitely some interesting parallels to consider with what he accomplished in Denver. OG can't do everything on defense, even though he tries his best to cover for everyone else's mistakes and limitations. Perhaps the Knicks front office could look at that Denver model and say, Michael Malone found a way to have a legitimately good defense around a center who was unto good rim protector. Which is exactly what the Knicks have to figure out with Cat. This is why we've seen them lean more into those Mitchcott lineups, experimenting with different combinations to find something that works defensively. Okay, their two-men game developed to a level that ours didn't reach. But I think you still have to give Michael Malone credit for what he accomplished there. Getting Jokic higher up on screens, providing help on the backside, he figured out a comprehensive defensive system to deal with the fact that Jokic was just not that good of a rim protector, right? It's the way he developed that offensive system and got those two players to complement each other so perfectly deserves recognition. Even with all this criticism said, Thibs is better than a lot of coaching candidates out there, and that's what makes this decision so interesting and risky. Even though they got through the series and Cat was able to get a few more threes up in the middle games, that was about the extent of their offensive evolution. Looking at the criticisms of Thibs, of course, there's the stubbornness with the lineups that frustrated fans all season long. But when you combine that with the depth and rotation issues that Thibs struggled with, plus the defensive concerns, you start to see why this decision was made. I mean, you'll see a playoff game where they both finish with 20-plus points. You'd see OG just coming out of nowhere to steal the ball from him. It's making these incredible defensive plays that had everyone on their feet. But most of the time, having Cat as your center creates defensive issues that you have to constantly scheme around. And a lot of it was Cat taking on his defender in isolation. Situations driving on Miles Turner or Pascal Siakam, whatever matchup they gave him. There is also the fact that while the Knicks offense finished with a good offensive rating for the entire regular season, actually towards the top of the league, we saw some concerning trends when it mattered most. In round 1 against the Pistons, it was a process and then some for them to figure it out offensively. This forced Cot to have to body through Tobias Harris so much just to get baskets. And you would hope that there would be other offensive solutions available. And they put the Celtics offense in the mud defensively. Offensively for the Knicks, it was once again a grinding process. Eventually, they lose that series. But then came the Pacers series with that disastrous Game 1. Honestly, one of the worst moments in recent Knicks history. In the Celtics series, while they pulled off those crazy comebacks that had everyone believing, the Brunson-Cot-Tooman game just has not developed enough. That's a massive problem for a team with championship aspirations. Then there's Brunson, and it's like he has to figure it out completely on his own versus guys like Obi Toppin all over him, or Nembhard, or Nesmith getting physical with him. Sure. If you go through all the Knicks' offensive possessions during these series, you're going to see some Brunson-Cot-Tooman game action. Again, You have this situation where their offensive rating for the season was still really good because of the spacing, the talent, the whole package they put together. Defensively, this team is just not good enough, except for when they shocked my Celtics in those incredible games. Jaylen Brown was totally out of whack with the timing of the Knicks' help defense. That's why we saw some of those Mitch and Cat lineups experimented with, trying to find the right defensive balance. Okay, so those are the reasons that I'm going to assume they made this decision. It also feels like while you will definitely see plays with deliberate sets for Mikal or OG, where they're cutting off of Cot, or one of them is screening for Brunson, or there's some nice off-ball movement. It also felt like there were too many possessions, when they just sort of forgot that those two players can do more than just stand around and take open catch, shoot threes. Mikal also needs to be more aggressive, taking layups and getting to the rim instead of settling for perimeter shots all the time. Michael Malone has already been the most popular name that people imagined for these guys. It was just people speculating when they wondered if the Knicks could actually fire Thibs, right? You could make the argument that the Marija kick two-man game was going to develop the way it did regardless of who was coaching that team. Also, looking at the defense they had around Jokic as they won that championship. Sure, they had more good individual defenders than Denver has now, but the scheme was brilliant. They would sometimes still sprinkle in Jokic, dropping back on screens when the matchup called for it. But they had multiple defensive looks they could go to. Also, Jokic is obviously better than our two main guys, but whatever, the principle still applies. This could be something they do more of or less of, depending on the new coach's philosophy. I think there's definitely a minute limitation to Mitch, which relates to how he plays. His stamina, injury concerns, the whole package of issues that come with his style of play. I still like Josh Hart a lot as a player, and what he brings to the team. But this also plays into another major frustration that Knicks fans had with Thibs throughout the entire season. As far as roster construction goes, I've already talked about how they need to get a wing who could be more of a shooter defender combination than Josh Hart. It just basically never happened, no matter how much fans and media members advocated for it. Maybe I'm doing too much analysis. Is that it didn't feel like the Nuggets players were that emotionally beat up about him being gone from the organization? I'd also like to think that over the many years that he was there in Denver, there were a lot of good vibes and positive relationships built, maybe just not as much toward the very end of his tenure there. Their defense did get noticeably better after his departure, which tells you something about the impact coaching changes can have. When you're thinking about other potential candidates for this position, there's one other coach who has won a championship, who also has won a ridiculous number of regular season games, who just recently got fired from his position. I'm sure Thibs' pushback to that suggestion would have been, well, we need a guard off the bench when Brunson's not in the game to handle playmaking duties, or if they actually went ahead and hired him. Everybody would absolutely roast the hell out of that move. His track record speaks for itself, even if the recent playoff performances haven't been what people expected. Every coaching change comes with risk and uncertainty, no matter how qualified the candidate appears on paper or how much success they've had in previous stops. The NBA is a results-oriented business where even championship-winning coaches can find themselves out of work. If things do go according to plan, or any other candidate who might emerge during this process, there will always be legitimate criticisms and concerns that fans and media can point to. They essentially betting that the ceiling with a different coach is higher than what they could achieve by running it back with Thibs, and the same system that got them to the conference finals. The core pieces are still there: Brunson, Cat, Mikal. But the question becomes whether a new voice and new system can unlock more of their potential. The organization has made it clear that they believe this roster is capable of more than what we saw under Thibodeau's system, despite the relative success they achieved. Every candidate comes with their own set of concerns and question marks. The risk of disrupting team chemistry and continuity is real, but so is the potential reward of unlocking more offensive creativity and defensive consistency. If the new coach can develop that Brunson-Cot two-man game, implement better rotations, and find ways to maximize players like Deuce McBride and the supporting cast, then the move will be vindicated. If not, it could go down as a costly mistake that wasted a promising window with this core group. They would immediately start talking about postseason adjustments, drop coverage, defensive schemes, and all the criticisms that have followed him in recent years. Making the conference finals isn't enough anymore. This team needs to take the next step and compete for an actual championship, especially in a competitive Eastern Conference. The stakes couldn't be higher for this franchise and their championship aspirations. All season long it was, can we please see Deuce McBride with the starters over Josh Hart? And then Dante DiVincenzo eventually showed up and provided some of that bench scoring. And hire the right replacement who can take this team to the next level. The margin for error is slim, especially with the competitive landscape in the Eastern Conference continuing to evolve. The key is finding the right fit for your specific roster and organizational culture, and hoping that the strengths outweigh the potential weaknesses. Or Thibs might argue, well, we might be a little too small defensively with Deuce and Brunson both in the game at the same time. But the idea there would be having an on-ball defender who can also shoot consistently from three-point range. To which Knicks fans would respond, bro, Tyler Kolek is right there instead of Cam Payne. That Brunson-Deuce lineup played only 41 minutes over the entire season, which is absolutely crazy when you think about it. To be completely fair and objective, it's not a certainty that it would have been successful if we saw it deployed more often. But the sample size was so small that we never really got to find out what that combination could do. Now, the lasting impression we have of Michael Malone, and I'm attempting to read between the lines here, but again, he built the defensive infrastructure and system that won them a championship. And that absolutely matters when you're evaluating his overall contribution. So we'll see what the Knicks decide to do with their coaching search and who they ultimately settle on. That coach would be Doc Rivers, and I guarantee you right now, if Doc Rivers was in the rumors for the Knicks job. But here's the thing. The guy is way more successful than a lot of other coaching candidates you might want to imagine for this position. Besides Michael Malone, the point I'm making is that as you go through this NBA coaching carousel situation, there's going to be something that is going to freak you out about any coach that any team decides to hire. Whether it's Doc Rivers and his playoff adjustments, or Michael Malone, and questions about whether his success was more about having Jokic, that is just the nature of coaching changes in professional sports, nor rarely a perfect candidate who doesn't have some kind of baggage or area where they've struggled in the past. Versus coaching carousel reality extends throughout the entire NBA, not just with the Knicks situation. You look at successful coaches who have been fired recently, and there are always valid reasons why their previous organizations moved on from them, even if they accomplished great things during their tenure. For the Knicks specifically, this decision to move on from Thibodeau represents a significant philosophical shift for the organization. It's a calculated risk that could either pay off tremendously or backfire spectacularly. Depending on who they hire and how well that new coach can maximize the talent on this roster, the pressure will be enormous on whoever takes this job because the expectation level has been set. The bottom line is that this Knicks coaching decision will be scrutinized heavily, and rightfully so. Whether that belief is justified remains to be seen, but the pressure is now on the front office to identify. Teams like Boston, Miami, Philadelphia, when healthy, and Milwaukee are all going to be formidable opponents. The Knicks need to ensure that this coaching change actually improves their chances rather than setting them back. Ultimately, this decision will be judged based on results. The next few weeks will be crucial as we learn who emerges as the leading candidate and what direction the Knicks decide to go.